In this video, you'll learn how to take images from anywhere, even an iPhone, and turn them into seamless textures you can use right inside of Cinema 4D. Textures are way more useful if they're seamless. So we're gonna look at 3 images taken with my iPhone that have varying levels of difficulty, and we will get them ready for use in Cinema 4D. If you're interested in learning Cinema 4D, check out our curriculum, which includes Cinema 4D Basecamp, a 12-week interactive course taught by none other than E.J. Hassenfratz. Also, make sure to download the project files and assets from this video so that you can try these techniques out for yourself after you're done watching. When you're applying textures to 3D objects in Cinema 4D, it's really helpful if they are seamless. Here's why. I've got a very simple scene here. It's just a sphere with a material that has one texture, this sort of asphalt texture, some lights, and it's in a seamless environment. This is what the render looks like. Now, if I wanted that sphere to look a little bit larger, I need the texture itself to scale down. Right now, we're not seeing enough detail to tell us that this is a large sphere. It looks like a small one. So because this is a seamless texture, what I can do is just come over to the texture tag here, and then I can just adjust the number of tiles in the U and V directions. Now I've used the set driver set driven command so that all I have to do is change tiles V, tiles U will update. So if I increase tiles V, you can see that the texture has appeared to get more detailed. Everything's shrunk, and so now there are more details for us to look at. And I can keep pushing this even further. Now, the reason this is possible is because this is a 2K texture that has been made seamless, and I'm going to show you how to do that in Photoshop. I've got some other textures down here that I wanted to show you really quickly. This texture was made from a picture of drywall in my office. I know, very interesting. And because it's seamless, I can also scale this up and down. Now, you're probably seeing some little banding in there. There were some areas of the drywall that were flatter, and so those do kind of give away that this was a texture that has been made seamless. And so with different textures, you have to sort of adapt how large you make them, how small you make them. And if I was gonna try to make the texture this small, I might have to go into Photoshop and clean it up a little bit more. But let me show you one more texture. So this wooden texture was created from a door in my office, and believe it or not, it is seamless. If I scale this back down to around 1, you can see that this is what the door looked like, but I was able to create a seamless texture from it using some tricks, and now I can make this more detailed by scaling it up, and it's totally seamless. So seamless textures, very, very useful. Let's learn how to make them. There are 3 images that I'm going to be showing you how to make seamless. There is an asphalt texture. This is the parking lot right outside my office. This is the wall right outside my office, drywall. And this is a door. And this picture is about as awful as a picture could be. I wasn't even holding the camera straight, but I'm going to show you how even this can be turned into a seamless texture. So let's start with the easiest one, the asphalt. So the first thing I'm gonna wanna do is to create a new Photoshop document at the resolution that I'd like my texture to be. Textures are K texture, 2048 by 2048. Next, I'm going to go to my asphalt image. I'm just gonna hit Command-A to select all, Command-C to copy, and I'm going to copy this right into my new texture comp. Now I'm going to transform this and hold Shift to scale it down proportionally, and I'm doing this so that I get all of that nice detail in that 2K texture. Now this image actually still has information that's being cut off outside the bounds of the Photoshop canvas. So what I need to do is get rid of that. And just to show you what I mean, if I scooch this to the left, you can see there's more pixels. So I want to get rid of those. So what I'm going to do is hit Command-A to select all, Command-C to copy, Command-V to paste, and then I'm going to delete the original layer. And so now I have a layer that only has pixels that are within Photoshop's canvas. So now, how can you tell that this isn't already seamless? Well, there's a really easy trick to do that in Photoshop. Go up to Filter, Other, Offset. The offset effect will shift the pixels in an image horizontally, vertically, however you set it. And just to show you what it does, I'm going to adjust the vertical property. Okay, so it's pushed every pixel in this image 290 pixels down, and when it got to the bottom, it wrapped around and put them at the top. And so now you can see that this was the top of the image and this was the bottom, and now there's a seam there. So let me adjust this so that seam is right in the middle. Perfect. Now let's look at horizontal. So I'm shifting this to the right, and the crazy thing is I'm not actually seeing a seam. Sometimes you get lucky and you'll get an image where there's not an obvious seam, but we're still gonna wanna deal with this. So I'm gonna hit OK, and I'm gonna zoom in here. So this is obviously the seam where the top and the bottom meet. And now if you look really closely, you can see that this is the horizontal seam right here. So now that we've identified that, we can clean all of that up. With an image like this, you can probably get away with going the easy route using the spot healing brush and the clone stamp. So let's start with the spot healing brush. The spot healing brush works sort of like a clone stamp, except instead of you having to tell Photoshop where to clone from, it sort of figures it out itself. It's pretty cool. So the first thing I want to do is make this brush a little bit bigger by using the right bracket key. And then I'm going to just paint a line right across that seam. And you can see that Photoshop has erased the seam. If we zoom in there, it's still obvious that there is some difference between this part of the asphalt and this part, but there is no hard edge. So now let's go to the vertical seam. I know it's hard to see, but here is the vertical seam right there. And actually, to make this even easier, this is actually crazy how seamless this image is even without doing much to it. I'm gonna put a ruler there just so I don't lose it. Then I'm gonna grab my spot healing brush and I'm just going to paint a stroke down like this. Okay, so now there are no seams, but this is still a very uneven texture. To prove that, I'm gonna go back up to filter and run the offset command again. Now there's a hotkey for this, and since you're gonna be doing this a lot, you're gonna wanna learn it. Control-Command-F, which will just rerun the last filter that you used. So I'm just hitting Control-Command-F a few times, and you can see that there's no obvious hard edge or anything like that, but it is pretty obvious that this isn't gonna be very seamless because you have this area here that doesn't really match anything around it. So I can try using the spot healing brush to just sort of paint a big blob like this, and sometimes that actually works, and it'll at least get you started. So let's see what Photoshop does here. And it actually did a pretty decent job. I'm telling you, the tools in Photoshop just get better and better. And so now you can see pretty clearly where there's some schmutz we need to clean up. So I'm gonna do that now, still using the spot healing brush. So this area here, this is giving the spot healing brush some trouble. So now I'm gonna switch to the clone stamp, which is in the same menu, but S is the hotkey. So I need to make my clone stamp brush bigger by using the right bracket key. Then I'm gonna hold Option and I'm gonna pick a point on the image that I think it would be nice to clone from, maybe up here. Now, as I move my brush over the area that's offensive to me, I am going to get a little bit of a preview of how this is gonna look, and then I'm just gonna start painting. And you don't wanna clone giant areas whole. You wanna sort of grab another part of the image and mix it up so that your eye isn't gonna detect any patterns once this thing is being used as a texture. So I'm just sort of going around and picking random spots and cloning and trying to get rid of anything that's very distinct and that I think is gonna give the texture away. Now I'm gonna hit Control-Command-F and run the offset command a few more times. And as I'm doing this, I'm noticing that it is looking a lot more seamless, but there is still something that's catching my eye, which is this vertical detail right here. So what I'm gonna do is use the clone stamp and I'm gonna grab a piece over here and then paint a little bit. Grab a different piece, paint a little bit. Grab a different piece, paint a little bit. And so by doing it this way, I can make sure that I'm not gonna detect any patterns once this thing is tiled. There's still a few areas that I think are gonna jump out when it's tiled, so I'm fixing those. And just like that, in really just a couple of minutes, this thing is good to go. We have a 2K asphalt textures. There's even some little leaves in there, some little bonus leaves. All right, so this one was pretty easy. Let's move on to a harder one. So the next texture is a picture I took of my hallway right outside my office, and there was some drywall that, I don't know, just thought it had some nice detail. It was kind of an interesting texture. And I took a picture of it and I thought, oh, this is gonna be easy. So I've copied the photo into a 2K Photoshop canvas, and I've already gotten rid of the extra pixels so that we can just start working on making this seamless. Now, you might think that this would be pretty easy to make seamless, but there's one issue that you're probably not spotting yet. If I go to Filter and run that offset command again, you can see here's the seam vertically. That seems like it wouldn't be too hard to clean up, but oh my goodness, what's going on here? Well, what's going on here is that my hallway, much like almost every hallway on Earth, has lights in the ceiling above you. And so the top of the wall is always going to be a little bit brighter than the bottom. How do we deal with that? So this is where I'm going to show you my first trick for doing this. And I did not invent this trick. This has been used by 3D artists since the Bible. So what we're going to do is first make a copy of this layer. And I'm going to name the bottom one original just so we have something to compare back to. Then I can turn that off. Next, I'm going to need two layers. I'm going to need a color layer. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to need a detail layer. So let's turn off detail for a minute. Now, essentially, what we need to do is keep all of this nice detail that's in this image, but get rid of the overall light cast that's on it. And so let's first deal with that light cast. What we want to do is basically get an average color for the lighting in this shot, and luckily, there is a handy filter to do that. So we'll go to Filter, Blur, Average. Average just spits out a solid color that is the average of every pixel in your image. Great. Now I can turn on this detail layer. What I'm going to do is run a command on it called a high pass filter. It's found in Filter, Other, High Pass. What a high pass filter does is turns the image completely gray, but then it tries to find detail in it, and it basically creates an embossed version of that detail. So as I adjust the radius up or down, you'll see that it's sort of finding bigger details in the image as I raise the radius, and if I scale down, it finds smaller ones. What I'm trying to do here is get this to look like the drywall actually looked, and it's kind of hard to do that without seeing it. So I'm gonna hit cancel. I'm gonna take this original version here, move it up to the top, and then I'm just going to put a mask on this. I'm using my marquee tool. I hit M to draw a little rectangle here, and I'm gonna click this button way down here to create a layer mask, so that now on my detail layer, I can run that high pass filter, but I can see it in the context of the original image. And so now I can see that that is not enough big detail. And if I go too far, it gets a little chunky. So I may want it sort of somewhere in this range here, maybe. Great. So now I'll hit OK, and I'll turn off the original. Now, what have we done? We've basically split this image into two components. We've got the overall color, and then we've got the detail. So now I'm going to take this layer, and I'm going to set it to linear light mode. Now, linear light mode works a lot like hard light mode. It's essentially making the pixels that are brighter than 50% gray brighten everything below it. And if the pixels are darker than 50% gray, it darkens everything below it. But linear light does that in a little bit more of an extreme way, more like a color dodge or a color burn. And I kind of like that result, but you can play around with different transfer modes if you want. Now remember, the goal here is I want to match the original wall texture. So if we zoom in here, you can see there's this little square here where I've got the actual original image showing through. Everything else is being created by these two layers here. And so now I can maybe try some different modes. I could try hard light mode, which in this case looks like it's going to get us a little bit closer to the original wall texture, although we're losing some of these bright highlights. So I think what's going to do it here is just playing with the opacity of this detail layer. I like to use the keyboard to do that. You can always come up here and use this slider, but a handy shortcut is make sure that you are on the Move tool, which is V for the hotkey. And then using your number pad on the right side of your keyboard, you can use the numbers as a shortcut, make sure your layer is selected, and then just hit, say, 5, and it will drop the opacity to 50%. 1 is 10%, 9 is 90%. And around 50% here, it starts to match pretty darn good. So let's zoom out, and I'm gonna disable this layer mask by hitting Shift and clicking on this thumbnail. So this is the original shot, and this is the texture that we've created. Pretty slick. So now we need to make it seamless. So what I'm gonna do is hit Command A. I'm gonna run the copy merged command. Edit, copy merged, and the hotkey is Shift Command C. And what that does is it copies everything that you can see, not just the layer that's selected, so that when I hit paste, I basically have a copy of everything I just did on one layer. I'm gonna turn everything else off because I don't need it right now. And then I'm gonna run the offset command. So let's shift these over a little bit sideways and you can see the seam there. And then we'll shift everything down a little bit and you can see the seam there. And now this is gonna be much, much, much easier to clean up than with all of this lighting in there. All right, so I'm gonna do this really quickly using the spot healing brush and the clone stamp. You may notice with the spot healing brush, I am being very sloppy, and it doesn't really matter. It does a great job of blending the edges, so you generally don't have to worry about that. But I did soften the brush just to see if that would give me a better result, and it seems like it is, so that may be something that you want to try too. So now I'm gonna hit Control-Command-F, and I'm just gonna run that offset command a few more times and see if anything jumps out. Now, one thing that does jump out is you've got some areas of the drywall that are really, really sharp and detailed, and then you've got other parts like here where it's less sharp and detailed. And that may be something that you notice when this tiles onto a 3D object. And so if you're worried about that, you can use the clone stamp or the spot healing brush to try and fill some of this in. So I hit S to select the clone stamp, and I'm picking some areas that have more detail in them. And I'm just gonna try to sort of fill in these fuzzy, mushy areas with areas that have more detail to them. And I'm being very careful not to clone an area that's really big because, again, I don't want my eye to detect a pattern. And I'm constantly checking by running the offset command again so that I can see if there's any new areas that I spot. All right, so this could use a little bit more work, but overall, that's pretty good. We now have a seamless 2K drywall texture, and we had to remove the lighting from it, which was kind of tricky. So now you know how to do that. All right, we got one more. All right, so this is gonna be like the boss battle. This one's gonna get wacky. So the first thing we need to do is try to get rid of this perspective on the shot. The camera's tilted and it's not flat to the door, and this is going to make this harder. So what I'm gonna do is first hold Option and double click this layer so it becomes a layer I can mess around with. And I'm gonna use the transform command, Command-T. In transform mode, I wanna hold Control, click the layer, and I wanna go into perspective mode. Now, perspective mode is really cool. So watch this. If I grab the bottom right edge of this and I pull out, it also pulls the left edge out. And you can see how that sort of removes the perspective that was present in the image. Now, the image is also tilted, so I could rotate this or I could skew this image. So I'm gonna hold Command and grab this top handle here and just skew this so that it's straight up and down. And I might grab a ruler over here so that I can really try to get this as close to perfect as possible. And that is pretty good. It's certainly a lot better than what we were starting with. So I'll hit Enter to accept that, and now that step is done. Now, of course, we are not gonna be able to use all of this image. We can't, have a doorknob. That wouldn't make sense, and we don't want the molding around the door. So all I'm gonna do is use the best part of the image, which is sort of this interior part of the door, and I'm going to sort of clone that around, and we've got a lot of work to do. Now let's make this a 4K texture. So that's gonna be 4096 by 4096. All right, so I have pasted this image into a 4K canvas in Photoshop, and we can't use all of this. It's not gonna work. So here's what we need to do. I am just gonna use my marquee tool, M, and I'm just gonna grab this part right there. I'm gonna copy it and paste it and turn off this other layer, okay? And I don't need this anymore, I can just get rid of it. So this is what we're working with right here. Now, we could try to do the same trick that we did on the previous image. We could split this into a color layer and a detail layer. And in fact, I can do that really quickly to show you why it won't work in this case. All right, so I've set this up the same way that I did for the drywall shot, and you can see it doesn't work as well. I ran the average blur on the color layer, and this was the average color of the door, and then the detail pass is coming up with this. Now, while you could color correct this and try to get it to look more like the original door, the real problem is the original door had all of this nice color variation to it, and it'd be kind of nice to keep some of that. So how do we do that? All right, so I hit undo a bunch of times, and we're back to where we started. So I'm gonna turn the background black for a moment. It will become clear why in a minute. And then I'm gonna make a copy of this layer. And we are going to still sort of have a detail layer and sort of have a color layer, but we're gonna do this a little bit differently. So I'm just gonna name this top layer color, and I'm gonna run a Gaussian blur on it. Now, here's what I'm looking for. I want to basically get rid of all high frequency detail. High frequency detail are things like wood grain and really fine textures. I want to try to get rid of all of that, but not go too far. Because you can see that by getting rid of that, I still keep a lot of this nice color variation, and I could make a seamless version of that color variation, and it's gonna be a lot easier blurring it this way. So our color layer is blurred. The next thing we need to do is hit Command-I to invert the color of this layer. Now that seems pretty weird, but the next step will make it clear why. I now need to set the opacity of this layer to 50%. Hopefully now you can sort of see where this is going. Because we blurred the original image, we got rid of all those high contrast details. And by inverting the colors and layering it back on top of itself, we've basically neutralized everything. We flattened out most of the color. Now, this looks pretty awful, but we can fix it. But before we go to the next step, I want you to notice that there is a pretty clear horizontal line here that I think is going to stand out when this is tiled. So let's fix that now rather than later. So let's make the opacity of this layer 100% again. And if we zoom out, you can sort of see where that line is, okay? So what I'm going to do is sort of zoomed out like this because it's a little bit easier to see. I'm going to start with my spot healing brush, and I'm just going to try to paint this side of the frame and that little spot there and see if it'll even it out. That's not too bad. Now there's a little bit of a weird seam here, but I bet I can just paint those things out too. Now I'm going to switch to the clone stamp and try and get some of these other little areas a little bit more cleaned up. And then I can also go in and just blur it a little bit more. So I'll go back to Gaussian blur, and a blur that's about 30 is going to do it. Now if I set the opacity back to 50%, you can see that there still is a little bit of a line there. It's been minimized a little bit, and we'll probably have to do a little bit more cleanup later. So now what I want to do is merge these two layers together. Now I'm going to want to keep a copy of this, so I'm going to make a copy, turn it off, select these two layers and hit Command-E to merge them. Now you can see that the color is all washed out here. That won't do, so let's fix that up. I'm going to apply a levels effect, Command-L. And I'm going to go channel by channel and adjust these levels. So I want to take the white input and move it right to where this skinny little line ends. And then on the black input, I'm going to move it right over to where it looks like the black information begins. I'll then do the same on green and blue. And there we go. Now, it doesn't exactly match the original door. Let me pull that layer above and move it off to the side so we can compare. So this is the original door, and this is the door that we have manipulated. And you can see this area here is definitely going to create some issues. So let's first just go ahead and clean that up. So I'm just using the clone stamp tool with a big soft brush, and I'm going to pick a couple of spots and just come in here and paint out that area. And while I'm at it, I might as well grab a spot and get rid of the door handle. All right, so with just a few minutes of work, this is what we have. Now, it doesn't match the color of this, but if you look at the overall wood grain and the way this feels, we're pretty darn close. Now, I do like the color of this door. It's like a rich mahogany. So what I'm going to do is grab my color picker with the I hotkey, and I'm going to grab a color that feels pretty rich. And then what I'm going to do is make a new layer, Shift-Command-N, and then Option-Delete to fill that layer with my foreground color. I'm going to hold Option right over this manipulated color layer so that I can use it as a clipping mask. And then I can set this new solid layer to color blending mode. Now we are getting closer. Let me rename this layer here color because that's not what it is anymore. This is actually our new texture. And I'll run a levels effect on it to try and bring a little bit more contrast to it. And there we go. This feels a lot closer to the original door. So I'm going to say good to go. Let me turn off the original. Now, we still have a problem. This is a 4K texture, and we don't have 4K of texture, do we? No problem. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab my marquee tool with M, and I'm just going to grab a section here. And in doing that, I noticed there's still a shadow there. So let's fix that. Let's try the spot healing brush, like magic. So with my marquee tool, I can just grab a big chunk of this door. I was noticing that there was a little vignetting down here at the bottom, and I want to make sure I avoid that, so that's why I've only selected the interior part of the door. Shift-Command-C, so I can copy everything that I'm seeing in my canvas and then paste, and I'll move this layer to the top and turn everything else off. So now what I'll do is move this over to the top left corner, hold Option and Shift, and click and drag a copy, maybe somewhere there. Now, you can see there's a big seam there, but that should be pretty easy to take care of if I just take an eraser with a nice big soft brush and just erase the edge of it. There we go. Now, because this layer is blending into this next one, I might want to sort of work on this edge a little bit with the eraser, but when you're zoomed out, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to select both of these layers and merge them with Command-E. Then I'm going to move this layer over with Shift and Option to make a copy, and I'm gonna shift this up a little bit so that it's a little bit more random. Now I have a seam there that I need to deal with, but I might as well just go ahead and finish this off. So I'm gonna Shift, Option, click, drag, and then move this one down. So let's deal with these seams. I'm gonna merge all three of these layers together, Command E, and then I'm gonna use my spot healing brush to try and just quickly get rid of these seams. All right, no more obvious seams. So now, if you look in the layer browser, you can see that this image has a lot of extra information around here, and we don't want that. We only want what we can see. So Command A, Shift Command C, copy merged, Command V, paste. And now here we have our texture. Now it's not seamless yet. We still need to run the offset command on it to see if we need to adjust. All right, so we can see the seams. There is a vertical one right here, and there's a horizontal one right there. And this ruler can go away. So those are the seams, and now, by this point, you should know how to take care of those. All right, and now we Control Command F, and we run the offset command a few times to see if anything jumps out. Are there any obvious patterns or seams? There are some little areas that are just a little bit brighter. And so when you see stuff like that, you can just quickly use the clone stamp tool and just paint them over. Then Control Command F, and just keep doing this until you're happy. And that, my friends, is good enough for government. And there you have it. You've just learned a lot of techniques to help you turn just about any image into a seamless texture. Make sure to hit subscribe if you want more tips like this one, and check the description so you can download the project files and photos from this video to practice with on your own. And if you're ready to learn Cinema 4D from the ground up with a one-of-a-kind interactive online class, check out Cinema 4D Basecamp from School of Motion. Until next time.